To travel is to live. In foreign countries, you learn where you come from and about yourself. Go abroad and learn about your home. Yes. My name is H.C. Andersen. I have seen so much. I have traveled all over Europe, visited the antique treasures of Italy, the lush mountains of Germany, England's foggy shores, but I sought adventure wherever I went. And I found it, in life itself, as well as in my destinations. If you cannot go abroad, well, you can do it in your mind, with your imagination. And there is no place better suited to breathe life into our dreams than the theatre. Everywhere I went, I sought the theatre. Often I would sit in the box for 5 out of 7 days a week, in Rome, Hamburg, London. And oh, these journeys and these hours in the dark sent my imagination spinning. And many people may object that life is too short for such nonsense. But in my opinion, life is too short to ignore the theatre, the longings and the dreams. Well, not everybody lives near a theatre or a playhouse, of course, but we are so fortunate that good people travel around the entire country to perform, even in the more humble and remote places. I have often met these courageous people on my journeys, on foot, by carriage, or at sea. And it was at sea that I met a man whom I shall never forget. On board a steamer, I once met an elderly man with such a merry face that if it was really, he must have been the happiest fellow in creation. And indeed, he considered himself so. For I heard it from his own mouth. He was a Dane, my countryman, the owner of a travelling theatre. He had all his company with him in a large box, for he was the proprietor of a puppet show. His inborn cheerfulness, he said, had been tested by a member of the Polytechnic institution, and the experiment had made him completely happy. I did not at first understand all this, but afterwards he explained the whole story to me, and here it is. I was giving a representation, he said, in the hall of the posting house in the little town of Slagelse. There was a splendid audience, entirely juvenile, excepting 2 respectable matrons. All at once, a person in black of student-like appearance entered the room and sat down. He laughed aloud at the telling points and applauded quite at the proper time. This was a very unusual spectator for me, and I felt anxious to know who he was. I heard that he was a member of the Polytechnic institution in Copenhagen, who had been sent out to lecture to the people in the provinces. Punctually at 8 o'clock, my performance closed, for children must go early to bed, and a manager must also consult the convenience of the public. At 9 o'clock, the lecturer commenced his lecture and his experiments, and then I formed a part of his audience. It was wonderful both to hear and to see. The greater part of it was beyond my comprehension, but it led me to think that if we men can acquire so much, we must surely be intended to last longer than the little span which extends only to the time when we are hidden away under the earth. His experiments were quite miraculous on a small scale, and yet the explanations flowed as naturally as water from his lips. At the time of Moses and the prophets, such a man would have been placed among the sages of the land. In the Middle Ages, they would have burnt him at the stake. All night long, I couldn't sleep. And the next evening, when I gave another performance and the lecturer was present, I was in one of my best moods. I once heard of an actor who, when he had to act the part of a lover, always thought of one particular lady in the audience. He played only for her and forgot all the rest of the house. And now the Polytechnic lecturer was my she, my only auditor, for whom alone I played. When the performance was over and the puppets removed behind the curtain, the Polytechnic lecturer invited me into his room to take a glass of wine. He talked of my comedies and I of his science, and I believe we were both equally pleased. But I had the best of it, for there was always much in what he did that he could not always explain to me. For instance, why a piece of iron which is rubbed on a cylinder should become magnetic. How does this happen? The magnetic sparks come to it, but how? It's the same with people in the world. They are rubbed about on this spherical globe till the electric spark comes upon them. And then we have a Napoleon, or a Luther, or someone of the kind. The whole world is but a series of miracles, said the lecturer. But we are so accustomed to them that we call them everyday matters. And he went on, explaining things to me till my skull seemed lifted from my brain, and I declared that were I not such an old fellow, I would at once become a member of the Polytechnic institution, that I might learn to look at the bright side of everything, although I was one of the happiest of men. One of the happiest, said the lecturer, as if the idea pleased him. Are you really happy? He asked. Yes, I replied, for I'm welcomed in every town when I arrive with my company. But I certainly have one wish which sometimes weighs upon my cheerful temper like a mountain of lead. I should like to become the manager of a real theatre and the director of a real living troupe of real men and women. I understand, he said. You would like to have life breathed into your puppets, so that they might be living actors, and you their director. And would you then be quite happy? I said, I believe so. But he did not, and we talked it over in all manner of ways, yet could not agree on the subject. However, the wine was excellent, and we clanked our glasses together as we drank. There must have been magic in it, or I should most certainly become tipsy. But that did not happen, for my mind seemed quite clear, and indeed a kind of sunshine filled the room, and beamed from the eyes of the Polytechnic lecturer. It made me think of the old stories when the gods, in their immortal youth, wandered upon this earth and paid visits to mankind. I said so to him, and he smiled. I could have sworn that he was one of those ancient deities in disguise, or at all events that he belonged to the race of the gods. The result seemed to prove I was right in my suspicions, for it was arranged that my highest wish should be granted, that my puppets were to be gifted with life, and that I was to be the manager of a real company. We drank to my success and clanked our glasses. Then he packed all my dolls into the box and fastened it on my back, and I felt as if I was spinning round in a circle and presently found myself lying on the floor. I remember that quite well. And then the whole company sprang from the box. The spirit had come upon us all. The puppets had become distinguished actors, at least so they said themselves, and I was their director. When all was ready for the first representation, the whole company requested permission to speak to me before appearing in public. The dancing lady said the house could not be supported unless she stood on one leg, for she was a great genius and begged to be treated as such. The lady who acted the part of the queen expected to be treated as a queen off the stage as well as on it, or else she said she would get out of practice. The man whose duty it was to deliver a letter gave himself as many airs as he who took the part of first lover in the piece. He declared that the inferior parts were as important as the great ones, and deserving equal consideration as parts of an artistic whole. The hero of the piece would only play in a part containing points likely to bring down the applause of the house. The prima donna would only act when the lights were red, for she declared that a blue light did not suit her complexion. It was like a company of flies in a bottle, and I was in the bottle with them, for I was their director. My breath was taken away, my head whirled, and I was as miserable as a man could be. It was quite a novel, strange set of beings among whom I now found myself. I only wished I had them all in my box again, and that I had never been their director. So I told them roundly that after all they were nothing but puppets, and then they killed me. After a while, I found myself lying on my bed in my room. But how I got there, or how I got away at all from the Polytechnic professor, he may perhaps know, I don't. The moon shone upon the floor, the box lay open, and the dolls were all scattered about in great confusion. But I was not idle. I jumped off the bed, and into the box they all had to go, some on their heads, some on their feet. Then I shut down the lid and seated myself upon the box. "Now you'll have to stay," said I, "and I shall be cautious how I wish you flesh and blood again." I felt quite light. My cheerfulness had returned, and I was the happiest of mortals. The Polytechnic professor had fully cured me. I was as happy as a king, and went to sleep on the box. Next morning, well, it was noon, for I slept remarkably late that day. I found myself still sitting there, in happy consciousness that my former wish had been a foolish one. I inquired after the Polytechnic professor, but he had disappeared like the Greek and Roman gods. From that time, I have been the happiest man in the world. I am a happy director, for none of my company ever grumble, nor the public either, for I always make them merry. I can arrange my pieces just as I please. I choose out of every comedy what I like best, and no one is offended. Plays that are neglected nowadays by the great public were ran after 30 years ago, and listened to till the tears ran down the cheeks of the audience. These are the pieces I bring forward. I place them before the little ones, who cry over them as Papa and Mama used to cry 30 years ago. But I make them shorter, for the youngsters don't like long speeches. They like it to be over quickly. Yes. Now I have travelled through the length and breadth of Denmark. I know everybody, and everybody knows me. Now I have gone to Sweden, and if I'm successful here and make good money, I shall become a Scandinavian, otherwise not. This I say unto you, who are my fellow countrymen. And I, as a fellow countryman, I tell it once again, of course, just for the telling of it. On my journeys in Europe, in Denmark, in life, I have met all kinds of people, and it has taught me one thing. A person and all that he holds should never be judged by appearances, by status, by his riches and position, but by his heart. Some have been given nothing from the beginning of life. Others have been given everything. But those who got everything from birth have so much more to lose. Once upon a time lived a poor prince. His kingdom, well, that was very small, but it was large enough to enable him to marry, and marry he would. It was rather bold of him that he went and asked the emperor's daughter, "Will you marry me?" But he ventured to do so, for his name was known far and wide, and there were hundreds of princesses who would have gladly accepted him. But would she do so? Now we shall see. On the grave of the prince's father grew a rose tree, the most beautiful of its kind. It bloomed only once in 5 years, and then it had only one single rose upon it. But what a rose! It had such a sweet scent that one instantly forgot all sorrow and grief when one smelt it. He had also a nightingale, which could sing as if every sweet melody was in its throat. This rose and the nightingale he wished to give to the princess, and therefore both were put into big silver cases and sent to her. The emperor ordered them to be carried into the great hall, where the princess was just playing Visitors Are Coming with her ladies-in-waiting. When she saw the large cases with the presents therein, she clapped her hands for joy. "I wish it were a little pussycat," she said. But then the rose tree with the beautiful rose was unpacked. "Oh, how nicely it is made!" exclaimed the ladies.
"It's more than nice," said the emperor. "It's charming."
The princess touched it and nearly began to cry. "For shame, Pa," she said. "It's not artificial, it's natural." "For shame, it's natural," repeated all her ladies.
"Let us first see what the other case contains before we are angry," said the emperor.
Then the nightingale was taken out, and it sang so beautifully that no one could possibly say anything unkind about it. "Superbe! Charmant!" said the ladies of the court, for they all prattled French, one worse than the other. "How much the bird reminds me of the musical box of the late lamented empress," said an old courtier. "It has exactly the same tone, the same execution." "You're right," said the emperor, and began to cry like a little child. "I hope it is not natural," said the princess. "Yes, certainly it's natural," replied those who had brought the presents. "Then let it fly," said the princess, and refused to see the prince. But the prince was not discouraged. He painted his face, put on common clothes, pulled his cap over his forehead, and came back. "Good day, Emperor," he said. "Could you not give me some employment at the court?"
"There are so many," replied the emperor. "But wait a moment, I require someone to look after my pigs, for I have a great many."
Thus the prince was appointed imperial swineherd, and as such he lived in a wretchedly small room near the pigsty. And there he worked all day long. And when it was night, he had made a pretty little pot. There were little bells around the rim, and when the water began to boil in it, the bells began to play the old tune. "A jolly old sow once lived in a sty, 3 little piggies had she, la la la." But what was more wonderful was that when one put a finger into the steam rising from the pot, one could at once smell what meals they were preparing on every fire in the whole town. That was indeed much more remarkable than the rose. When the princess, with all her ladies, passed by, and they heard the tune, she stopped and looked quite pleased, for she could also play it. A jolly old sow. In fact, it was the only tune she could play, and she played it with one finger. "That is the tune I know," she exclaimed. "He must be a well-educated swineherd. Go and ask him how much the instrument is." One of the ladies had to go and ask, but she put on patterns. "What will you take for your pot?" asked the lady. "I will have 10 kisses from the princess," said the swineherd. "God forbid," said the lady. "Well, I cannot sell it for less," replied the swineherd. "It is very naughty," said the princess, and walked off. But when she had gone a little distance, the bells rang again so sweetly. "A jolly old sow once lived in a sty, 3 little piggies had she." "Ask him," said the princess, "if he will be satisfied with 10 kisses from one of my ladies." "No, thank you," said the swineherd. 10 kisses from the princess, or I keep my pot." "That is tiresome," said the princess to her ladies. "But you must stand before me so that nobody can see it." The ladies placed themselves in front of her and spread out their dresses, and she gave the swineherd 10 kisses and received the pot. Such a pleasure! Day and night the water in the pot was boiling. There was not a single fire in the whole town of which they did not know what was preparing on it, the chamberlains as well as the shoemakers. The ladies danced and clapped their hands for joy. "We know who will eat soup and pancakes, we know who will eat porridge and cutlets. Oh, how interesting!" "But you must not betray me, for I am the emperor's daughter." "Of course not," they all said. The swineherd, that is to say the prince, but they did not know otherwise than that he was a real swineherd, did not waste a single day without doing something. He made a rattle, which, when turned quickly round, played all the waltzes, galops and polkas known since the creation of the world. "But that is superb," said the princess, passing by. "I have never heard a more beautiful composition. Go down and ask him what the instrument costs, but I shall not kiss him again." "He will have 100 kisses from the princess," said the lady who had gone down to ask him. "I believe he is mad," said the princess, and walked off. But soon she stopped. "One must encourage art," she said. "I am the emperor's daughter. Tell him I will give him 10 kisses as I did the other day. The remainder one of my ladies can give him." "But we do not like to kiss him," said the ladies. "That's nonsense," said the princess. "If I can kiss him, you can also do it. Remember that I give you food and employment." And the lady had to go down to him once more. 100 kisses from the princess, said the swineherd, or everybody keeps his own. "Place yourselves before me," said the princess then. They did as they were bidden, and the princess kissed him. "I wonder what that crowd near the pigsty means," said the emperor, who had just come out on his balcony. He rubbed his eyes and put his spectacles on. "The ladies of the court are up to some mischief, I think. I shall have to go down and see." He pulled up his shoes, for they were down at the heels. And he was very quick about it. When he had come down into the courtyard, he walked quite softly. And the ladies were so busily engaged in counting the kisses that all should be fair, that they did not notice the emperor. He raised himself on tiptoe. "What does this mean?" he said, when he saw that his daughter was kissing the swineherd, and then hit their heads with his shoe just as the swineherd received the 68th kiss. "Get out of my sight," said the emperor, for he was very angry, and both the princess and the swineherd were banished from the empire. There she stood and cried. The swineherd scolded her, and the rain came down in torrents. "Alas, unfortunate creature that I am," said the princess. "I wish I had accepted the prince. Oh, how wretched I am!" The swineherd went behind a tree, wiped his face, threw off his poor attire, and stepped forth in his princely garments. He looked so beautiful that the princess could not help bowing to him. "I have now learned to despise you," he said. "You refused an honest prince. You did not appreciate the rose and the nightingale, but you did not mind kissing a swineherd for his toys. You have no one but yourself to blame." And then he returned to his kingdom and left her behind. She could now sing at her leisure. "A jolly old sow once lived in the sty. 3 little piggies had she, la la la." Well, things will go wrong if you always seek the ingenious and not the artless. They've learned that in China as well. In China, as you well know, the emperor is Chinese. And all those about him are Chinese also. The story I'm going to tell you happened a great many years ago, so it's well to hear it now, before it's forgotten. The emperor's palace was the most beautiful in the world. It was built entirely of porcelain and very costly, but so delicate and so brittle that whoever touched it was obliged to be careful. In the garden could be seen the most singular flowers, with exquisitely pretty silver bells tied to them, which tinkled so that everyone who passed could not help noticing the flowers. Indeed, everything in the emperor's garden was remarkable, and it extended so far that the gardener himself did not know where it ended. Those who travelled beyond its limits knew that there was a noble forest with lofty trees sloping down to the deep blue sea, and the great ships sailed under the shadow of its branches. In one of these trees lived a nightingale, who sang so beautifully that even the poor fishermen, who had so many other things to do, would stop and listen. Sometimes when they went at night to spread their nets, they would hear her sing and say, "Oh, is that not beautiful?" But when they returned to their fishing, they forgot the bird until the next night. Then they would hear it again and exclaim, "Oh, how beautiful is the nightingale's song!" Travelers from every country in the world came to the city of the emperor, which they admired very much, as well as the palace and gardens. But when they heard the nightingale, they all declared it to be the best of all. And the travelers, on their return home, related what they had seen, and learned men wrote books containing descriptions of the town, the palace, and the gardens. But they did not forget the nightingale, which was really the greatest wonder. And those who could write poetry composed beautiful verses about the nightingale who lived in a forest near the deep sea. The books travelled all over the world, and some of them came into the hands of the emperor, and he sat in his golden chair. And as he read, he nodded his approval every moment, for it pleased him to find such a beautiful description of his city, his palace, and his gardens. But when he came to the words, "The nightingale is the most beautiful of all," he exclaimed. "What is this?" said the emperor. "I know nothing of any nightingale. Is there such a bird in my empire? And even in my garden? I have never heard of it. Something, it appears, may be learned from books." Then he called one of his lords-in-waiting, who was so high-bred that when anyone of inferior rank spoke to him or asked him a question, he would answer, "Pooh," which means nothing. "There is a very wonderful bird mentioned here called a nightingale," said the emperor. "They say it is the best thing in my large kingdom. Why have I not been told of it?" "I have never heard the name," replied the cavalier. "She has not been presented at court." "It is my pleasure that she shall appear this evening," said the emperor. "The whole world knows what I possess better than I do myself." "I have never heard of her," said the cavalier. "Yet I will endeavour to find her." But where was the nightingale to be found? The nobleman went upstairs and down, through halls and passages, yet none of those whom he met had heard of the bird. So he returned to the emperor, and said that it must be a fable, invented by those who had written the book. "Your Imperial Majesty," said he, "cannot believe everything contained in books. Sometimes they are only fiction, or what is called the black art." "But the book in which I have read this account," said the emperor, "was sent to me by the great and mighty emperor of Japan, and therefore it cannot contain a falsehood. I will hear the nightingale. She must be here this evening. She has my highest favour. And if she does not come, the whole court shall be trampled upon after supper is ended." "Ting Pi!" cried the lord-in-waiting. And again he ran up and downstairs, through all the halls and corridors, and half the court ran with him, for they did not like the idea of being trampled upon. There was a great inquiry about this wonderful nightingale whom all the world knew but who was unknown to the court. At last they met with a poor little girl in the kitchen who said, "Oh yes, I know the nightingale quite well. Indeed, she can sing. Every evening I have permission to take home to my poor sick mother the scraps from the table. She lives down by the seashore, and as I come back I feel tired and I sit down in the wood to rest and listen to the nightingale's song. Then the tears come into my eyes, and it is just as if my mother kissed me." "Little maiden," said the lord-in-waiting, "I will obtain for you constant employment in the kitchen, and you shall have permission to see the emperor dine if you will lead us to the nightingale, for she is invited for this evening to the palace." So she went into the wood where the nightingale sang, and half the court followed her. As they went along, a cow began lowing. "Oh," said a young courtier, "now we have found her. What wonderful power for such a small creature! I have certainly heard it before." "No, that's only a cow lowing," said the little girl. "We're a long way from the place yet." Then some frogs began to croak in the marsh. "Beautiful," said the young courtier again. "Now I hear it, tinkling like little church bells." "No, those are frogs," said the little maiden. "But I think we shall soon hear her now." And presently the nightingale began to sing. "Hark, hark, there she is," said the girl. "And there she sits," she added, pointing to a little grey bird who was perched on a bough. "Is it possible?" said the lord-in-waiting. "I never imagined it would be a little plain, simple thing like that. She has certainly changed colour at seeing so many grand people around her." "Little nightingale," cried the girl, raising her voice, "our most gracious emperor wishes you to sing before him." "With the greatest pleasure," said the nightingale, and began to sing most delightfully. "It sounds like tiny glass bells," said the lord-in-waiting, "and see how her little throat works. It's surprising that we have never heard this before. She will be a great success at court." "Shall I sing once more before the emperor?" asked the nightingale, who thought he was present. "My excellent little nightingale," said the courtier, "I have the great pleasure of inviting you to a court festival this evening, where you will gain imperial favour by your charming song." "My song sounds best in the greenwood," said the bird. But still she came willingly when she heard the emperor's wish. The palace was elegantly decorated for the occasion. The walls and floors of porcelain glittered in the light of 1,000 lamps. Beautiful flowers, round which little bells were tied, stood in the corridors. What with the running to and fro and the draught, these bells tinkled so loudly that no one could speak to be heard. In the centre of the great hall, a golden perch had been fixed for the nightingale to sit on. The whole court was present, and the little kitchen maid had received permission to stand by the door. She was not installed as a real court cook. All were in full dress, and every eye was turned to the little grey bird when the emperor nodded to her to begin. The nightingale sang so sweetly that the tears came into the emperor's eyes and then rolled down his cheeks as her song became still more touching and went to everyone's heart. The emperor was so delighted that he declared the nightingale should have his gold slipper to wear round her neck, but she declined the honour with thanks. She had been sufficiently rewarded already. "I have seen tears in an emperor's eyes," she said. "That is my richest reward. An emperor's tears have wonderful power and are quite sufficient honour for me." And then she sang again, more enchantingly than ever. "That singing is a most lovely gift," said the ladies of the court to each other. And then they took water in their mouths to make them utter the gurgling sounds of the nightingale, so that they might sound like nightingales themselves. Yes, and the footmen and chambermaids also expressed their satisfaction, which is saying a great deal, for these people are very difficult to please. Yes, in fact, the Nightingale's visit was most successful. She was now to remain at court, to have her own cage, with liberty to go out, twice a day and once during the night, and with 12 servants, who each held her by a silken string fastened to her leg. There was certainly not much pleasure in this kind of flying. And the entire city spoke of this wonderful bird. And whenever two people met, one said, night, and the other said, gale. And they understood what was meant. For nothing else was talked of. 11 peddlers' children were named after her, but none of them could sing a note. One day, the emperor received a large packet, on which was written, "The Nightingale." "Here is no doubt a new book about our celebrated bird," said the emperor. But instead of a book, it was a work of art contained in a casket. An artificial nightingale, made to look like a living one and covered all over with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. As soon as the artificial bird was wound up, it could sing like the real one and could move its tail up and down, which sparkled with silver and gold. Round its neck hung a piece of ribbon on which was written, "The Emperor of China's nightingale is poor compared with that of the Emperor of Japan's." "This is very beautiful," exclaimed all who saw it, and he who had brought the artificial bird received the title of Imperial Nightingale Bringer-in-Chief. "Now they must sing together," said the court, "and what a duet it will be." But they did not get on well, for the real nightingale sang in its own natural way, but the artificial bird sang only waltzes. "That's not a false," said the music master. "It's quite perfect to my taste," so then it had to sing alone. And was as successful as the real bird. Besides, it was so much prettier to look at, for it sparkled like bracelets and breastpins. 33 times it sang the very same tunes, but without being tired. The people said they would gladly have heard it again, but the emperor said the living nightingale ought to sing something. But where was she? No one had noticed her when she flew out of the open window back to her own green woods. "What strange conduct," said the emperor, when her flight had been discovered, and all the courtiers blamed her and said she was a very ungrateful creature. "But we have the best bird after all," said one, and then they had the bird sing again. Although it was the 34th time they had listened to the same piece, and even then they had not learnt it, for it was rather difficult. But the music master praised the bird in the highest degree, and even asserted that it was better than a real nightingale, not only in its dress and the beautiful diamonds, but also its musical power. For you must perceive, my chief lord and emperor, that with a real nightingale we can never tell what is going to be sung. But with this bird, everything is settled. It can be opened and explained, so that people may understand how the waltzes are formed and why one note follows upon another. "That is exactly what we think," they all replied. And then the music master received permission to exhibit the bird to the people on the following Sunday, and the emperor commanded that they should be present to hear it sing. And they heard it, and they were like people intoxicated. However, it must have been with drinking tea, which is quite a Chinese custom. And they all said, "Oh!" and held up their first finger, the one we call the pointing finger, and they nodded. But a poor fisherman who had heard the real nightingale said, "It sounds pretty enough, and the melodies are alike, yet something is wanting. I can't tell what." And the real nightingale was banished from the empire. The artificial bird was placed on a silk cushion close to the emperor's bed. The presents of gold and precious stones which had been received with it were set around the bird, and it was now advanced to the title of Little Imperial Chamber Singer, and to the rank of number 1 on the left-hand side, for the emperor considered the left side, on which the heart lies, as the very most noble, and the heart of an emperor is in the same place as that of other people. The music master wrote a piece of work in 25 volumes about the artificial bird, which was very learned and very long and full of the most difficult Chinese words. Yet all the people said they had read it and understood it for fear of being thought stupid and having their bodies trampled upon. So a whole year passed, and the emperor, the court, and all the other Chinese knew every little turn in the artificial bird's song. And for that very same reason, it pleased them better. They themselves could sing with the bird, which they often did. The street boys sang, "Zee, zee, zee, cluck, 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 cluck," and the emperor himself could sing it also. It was really most amusing. One evening, when the artificial bird was singing its best and the emperor lay in bed listening to it, something inside the bird sounded whiz, then a spring cracked, went all the wheels running round, and then the music stopped. The emperor immediately sprang out of bed and called for his physician. But what could he do? Then they sent for a watchmaker, and after a great deal of talking and examination, the bird was put into something like order. But he said that it must be used very carefully, as the barrels were worn down, and it would be impossible to put in new ones without injuring the music. Now there was great sorrow, as the bird could only be allowed to play once a year, and even that was dangerous for the works inside it. Then the music master made a little speech, full of hard words, and declared that the bird was as good as ever, and of course no one contradicted him. 5 years passed, and then a real grief came upon the land. The Chinese were really fond of their emperor, and he now lay so ill that he was not expected to live. Already a new emperor had been chosen, and the people who stood in the street asked the lord-in-waiting how the old emperor was. "Puh," he just said, and shook his head. The emperor lay cold and pale in his royal bed. The whole court thought he was dead, and everyone ran away to pay homage to his successor. The chamberlains went out to have a talk on the matter, and the ladies' maids invited company to take coffee. Cloth had been laid down on the halls and passages so that not a footstep should be heard, and all was silent and still. But the emperor was not yet dead, even though he lay white and stiff on his gorgeous bed, with the long velvet curtains and heavy gold tassels. A window stood open, and the moon shone in upon the emperor and the artificial bird. The poor emperor, finding he could scarcely breathe with a strange weight on his chest, opened his eyes and saw death sitting there. He had put on the emperor's golden crown, and held in one hand his sword of state, and in the other his beautiful banner. All around the bed and peeping through the long velvet curtains were a number of strange heads, some very ugly and others lovely and gentle-looking. These were the emperor's good and bad deeds, which stared him in the face now death sat at his heart. "Do you remember this? Do you recall that?" they asked one after another, thus bringing to his remembrance circumstances that made the perspiration stand on his brow. "I know nothing about it," said the emperor. "Music, music," he cried, "the large Chinese drum, that I may not hear what they say." But still they went on, and death nodded like a Chinaman to all they said. "Music, music," shouted the emperor. "You little precious golden bird, sing, pray, sing. I have given you gold and costly presents. I have even hung my golden slip around your neck. Sing, sing." But the bird remained silent. There was no one to wind it up, and therefore it could not sing a note. Death continued to stare at the emperor with his cold, hollow eyes, and the room was fearfully still. Suddenly, there came through the open window the sound of sweet music. Outside, on the bough of a tree, sat the living nightingale. She had heard of the emperor's illness and had therefore come to sing to him of hope and trust. And as she sang, the shadows grew paler and paler. The blood in the emperor's veins flowed more rapidly and gave life to his weak limbs. And even Death himself listened and said, "Go on, little nightingale, go on." "Then will you give me the marvelous golden saber? Will you give me the banner of the empire? Will you give me the emperor's crown?" said the bird. So Death gave up each of these treasures for a song, and the nightingale continued her singing. She sang of the quiet churchyard where the white roses grow, where the elder tree wafts its perfume on the breeze, and the fresh sweet grass is moistened by the mourner's tears. Then Death longed to see his garden and floated out through the window in the form of a cold white mist. Thank you, you heavenly little bird. I know you well. I banished you from my kingdom once, and yet you have charmed away the evil faces from my bed and banished death from my heart with your sweet song. How can I reward you?" "You have already rewarded me," said the nightingale. "I shall never forget that I drew tears from your eyes the first time I sang to you. These are the jewels that rejoice a singer's heart. But now sleep and grow strong and well. I will sing to you again." And as she sang, the emperor fell into a sweet sleep, and how mild and refreshing that slumber was. When he awoke, strengthened and restored, the sun shone brightly through the window, but not one of his servants had returned. They all believed he was dead. Only the nightingale still sat beside him and sang. "You must always remain with me," said the emperor. "You shall sing only when it pleases you, and I will break the artificial bird into 1,000 pieces." "No, do not do that," replied the nightingale. "The bird did very well as long as it could. Keep it here still. I cannot live in a palace and build my nest, but let me come when I like. I will sit on a bough outside your window in the evening and sing to you, so that you may be happy and have thoughts full of joy. I will sing to you of those who are happy and those who suffer, of the good and the evil who are hidden around you. The little singing bird flies far from you and your court to the home of the fisherman and the peasant's cot. I love your heart better than your crown, and yet something holy lingers around that also. I will come, I will sing to you, but you must promise me one thing." "Anything," said the emperor, who, having dressed himself in his imperial robes, stood with the hand that held a heavy golden sword pressed to his heart. "I only ask one thing," she replied. "Let no one know that you have a little bird who tells you everything. It will be best to conceal it." So saying, the nightingale flew away. When the servants came in to look after the dead emperor, there he stood, and to their surprise said, "Good morning." Yes. So a tiny nightingale managed to make an emperor say, "Good morning." Yes, there are many examples of people who regret it if they do not heed the artless and the forthright. Not only amongst kings and emperors, no, but in every situation in life. And the good God may have given life to more than we think. A whipping top and a little ball lay together in a box, among other toys. And the top said to the ball, "Shall we be married, as we live in the same box?" But the ball, which wore a dress of Morocco leather and thought as much of herself as any other young lady, would not even condescend to reply. The next day came the little boy to whom the playthings belonged, and he painted the top red and yellow and drove a brass-headed nail into the middle, so that while the top was spinning round, it looked splendid. "Look at me," said the top to the ball. "What do you say now? Shall we be engaged to each other? We should suit each other so well, you spring and I dance. No one could be happier than we should be." "Indeed, do you think so?" "Perhaps you do not know that my father and mother were Morocco slippers and that I have a Spanish cork in my body." "Yes, but I'm made of mahogany," said the top. "The Major himself turned me. He has a turning lathe of his own, and it's a great amusement to him." "Can I believe it?" asked the ball. "May I never be whipped again," said the top, "if I am not telling you the truth." "You certainly know how to speak for yourself very well," said the ball, "but I cannot accept your proposal. I am almost engaged to a swallow. Every time I fly up in the air, he puts his head out of the nest and says, 'Will you?' And I have said yes to myself silently. And that is as good as being half engaged. But I will promise never to forget you." "Much good that will be to me," said the top. And they spoke to each other no more. Next day, the ball was taken out by the boy. The top saw it flying high into the air like a bird till it would go quite out of sight. Each time it came back as it touched the earth, it gave a higher leap than before, either because it longed to fly upwards or from having a Spanish cork in its body. But the 9th time it rose in the air, it remained away and did not return. The boy searched everywhere for it, but he searched in vain, for it could not be found. It was gone. "I know very well where she is. Oh, she's in the swallow's nest and has married the swallow." The more the top thought of this, the more he longed for the ball. His love increased the more just because he could not get her, and that she should have been won by another was the worst of all. The top still twirled about and hummed, but he continued to think of the ball, and the more he thought of her, the more beautiful she seemed to his fancy. Thus several years passed by, and his love became quite old. The top also was no longer young. But there came a day when he looked handsomer than ever, for he was gilded all over. He was now a golden top, and whirled and danced about till he hummed quite loud and was something worth looking at. But one day he leaped too high, and then he also was gone. They searched everywhere, even in the cellar, but he was nowhere to be found. Where could he be? He had jumped into the dustbin, where all sorts of rubbish was lying. Cabbage stalks, dust and raindrops that had fallen down from the gutter under the roof. "Now I'm in a nice place," said he. "My gilding will soon be washed off here. Oh dear, what a set of riffraff I have landed amongst." And then he glanced at a curious round thing, like an old apple, which lay near a long, leafless cabbage stalk. It was, however, not an apple, but an old ball, which had lain for years in the gutter and was soaked through with water. "Thank goodness, here comes one of my own class with whom I can talk," said the ball, examining the gilded top. "I am made of Morocco," she said. "I was sewn together by a young lady, and I have Spanish cork in my body. But no one would think it to look at me now. I was once engaged to a swallow, but I fell in here from the gutter under the roof, and I have lain here more than 5 years and have been thoroughly drenched. Believe me, it is a long time for a young maiden." The top said nothing, but he thought of his old love, and the more she said, the more clear it became to him that this was the same ball. The servant then came to clean out the dustbin. "Ah," she exclaimed, "here's a gilt top." So the top was brought again to notice and honour, but nothing more was heard of the little ball. Well... And the top never spoke again a word about his old love. It died away. When the beloved object has lain for 5 years in a gutter, drenched through, no one cares to know her again on meeting her in a dustbin.